In 1870, a quiet 31-year-old bookkeeper in Cleveland controlled just 4% of America's oil refining capacity. 10 years later, he controlled 90%. By 1904, he oversaw 91% of oil production and 85% of final sales. That man was John D. Rockefeller. But what matters for you today isn't just that he dominated oil, it's that he created the operating system for modern corporate power. Standard Oil was officially broken up in 1911, but the method that built it never died. It evolved, spread, and now runs through almost every corner of your life in 2025. The gasoline you pump, the drugs you take, the platforms you scroll, the delivery apps you use, the banks that hold your money, almost all of them are built on his blueprint. Vertical integration, horizontal consolidation, regulatory capture, and philanthropic influence form a system that makes genuine competition nearly impossible. Rockefeller didn't just build a company, he built an architecture of control, and that architecture is still extracting wealth from you every single day. Once you understand how he built it, you won't just see Standard Oil as history, you'll see Rockefeller's fingerprints on the entire modern economy you live inside right now. John D. Rockefeller was born on July 8, 1839, into a tension that would shape his entire worldview. His father, Doc Rockefeller, was a traveling huckster selling fake cancer cures, disappearing for long stretches, and teaching his son that charm, deception, and leverage could move money. His mother, a strict Baptist, insisted on discipline, tithing, frugality, and the belief that God rewarded order and hard work. From his father, Rockefeller absorbed the instincts of a con man. Read people, exploit asymmetry, never show your full hand. From his mother, he absorbed the absolute conviction that his actions could be morally justified if they led to stability, efficiency, and what he saw as the greater good. In 1859, when oil was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania, the country plunged into an oil rush. Drill rigs went up overnight, fortunes were made and lost in days, and prices swung wildly between collapse and boom. Rockefeller watched all of this from Cleveland, not as a speculator, but as a bookkeeper who understood numbers, costs, and margins. He decided he would never gamble on finding oil. He would control the part everyone else depended on, refining. While others chased gushers in the mud, he quietly positioned himself where every barrel had to pass eventually, the refinery. Most early refiners were glorified middlemen. They bought crude from whoever had it, processed it in small, inefficient plants, and sold kerosene and byproducts to distributors at thin margins. Their fate depended on railroads, cooperages, suppliers, and commodity markets they did not control. Rockefeller's genius was to see that every external supplier was both a risk and a profit opportunity. If every step in the chain was making money off him, why shouldn't he own those steps himself? So he began pulling each piece of the oil business inside his orbit. He acquired barrel factories and even the timber needed to build them, slashing his costs while his rivals kept paying middlemen. He bought tank cars and negotiated secret long-term deals with railroads, ensuring better pricing and guaranteed capacity. He secured warehouses and storage depots so his product didn't sit in someone else's hands. He built his own distribution network so retailers purchased directly from Standard Oil, not from layers of intermediaries. All of this became vertical integration, a single organization controlling production, transport, refining, storage, and sale. Where competitors paid 25 cents per barrel for containers, Rockefeller spent 15. Where they begged for rail capacity, he had his own cars and hidden rebates. That allowed him to sell kerosene cheaper than anyone else and still make a profit. For the consumer, it looked like efficiency. For competitors, it was a slow strangulation. By 1870, Rockefeller had already transformed his first refinery into the largest operation in Cleveland. Yet his share of U.S. refining was still modest, around 4%. He understood that lower costs were only the first step. To truly control the industry, he had to control the landscape of competitors themselves. That is where horizontal integration began. In 1872, Rockefeller launched what later became known as the Cleveland Massacre. Over just a few months, he or his representatives visited nearly every refinery owner in the city. His offer sounded almost generous. Sell your refinery to Standard Oil at a fair price, often with a job managing the plant under the new ownership, and become part of a rationalized industry. If owners refused, he didn't threaten them directly. He let the numbers do the talking. Standard Oil cut prices aggressively in that region, selling kerosene at or even below cost. With his vertically integrated structure and secret railroad rebates, he could survive these losses. His rivals could not. One by one, owners surrendered. Those who tried to stand alone watched their margins disappear and creditors circle. Within 3 months, Rockefeller controlled 25 of Cleveland's 26 refineries. He took that model to other cities: Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore. Buy those who will sell. Bleed those who won't. Pick up what's left in bankruptcy. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of America's refining capacity. This wasn't market success in the way textbooks describe. It was the deliberate removal of alternatives. Absolute dominance brought Standard Oil massive profits, but also new threats. States were beginning to pass laws limiting how much property a single corporation could own, especially across state lines. At the same time, public anger was rising. Journalists, politicians, and small business owners saw Rockefeller as the embodiment of predatory capitalism. Simply owning everything under the same corporate name had become too obvious and too politically dangerous. Rockefeller's response was legal innovation. In 1882, his lawyers created the Standard Oil Trust. Rather than having Standard Oil of Ohio directly own refiners, pipelines, and affiliates in multiple states, shares in dozens of related companies were placed into a trust. In exchange, the original owners received trust certificates. Control now sat with a small group of trustees, almost entirely Rockefeller and his inner circle, who directed all those separate companies from the top. On paper, there were many corporations. In practice, there was one will. The trust itself did not refine oil or run pipelines. It simply owned the companies that did. This model allowed Rockefeller to skirt state-level restrictions and continue centralizing power. It also birthed a structural concept that would outlive Standard Oil: the holding entity. Over time, that structure became the blueprint for modern corporate groups, where one parent quietly controls a web of subsidiaries. Eventually, antitrust pressure forced a breakup, but that only transformed the trust into many highly valuable parts, with Rockefeller still holding a stake in nearly all of them. By the early 1900s, Rockefeller's empire had become too visible to ignore. Investigative journalist Ida Tarbell's exposé on Standard Oil detailed the secret rebates, the price wars, and the ruthless tactics used to crush competitors. Public rage grew, and politicians seized on that anger. The Sherman Antitrust Act had already been passed in 1890, and Standard Oil became its prime target. In 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court declared Standard Oil an illegal monopoly and ordered it broken into 34 separate companies. On the surface, this looked like a historic victory for competition and a devastating blow to Rockefeller. In reality, it was the beginning of a lucrative second act. Rockefeller did not lose ownership. He still held shares across these 34 new entities. Suddenly, investors could buy stock in focused, regional, and functional companies rather than one controversial behemoth. That clarity, combined with rapid industrial growth, drove up the combined market value of the pieces. Before the breakup, Standard Oil stock traded around $600. After the restructuring, the total value of all the spin-offs surged to more than $2,000 equivalent per original share. Rockefeller's net worth, already huge, multiplied. The names changed. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil. Standard Oil of California became Chevron, and other fragments merged or were acquired over the next century. The supposed destruction of Standard Oil ended up proving that, in a system structured like Rockefeller's, even antitrust can be absorbed and turned into profit.
More than a century later, Rockefeller's logic has simply moved from barrels and railroads to servers and shipping containers. If he were alive today, he would instantly recognize Amazon as a spiritual successor to Standard Oil. The surface story is that Amazon started as an online bookstore and expanded into a retail giant. The deeper story is that it followed the same core moves: own the infrastructure, dominate logistics, undercut rivals, and absorb or copy competitors. Amazon now controls vast networks of warehouses, fulfillment centers, delivery vehicles, and aircraft. It doesn't just sell goods, it physically moves them at every step. It processes payments, runs its own ad network, and through Amazon Web Services, AWS, provides cloud computing infrastructure to companies all over the world, including many that compete with its retail arm. This is vertical integration at digital scale. Horizontally, Amazon relentlessly acquires or neutralizes rivals. It has bought companies like Whole Foods, Zappos, Ring, Twitch, and MGM to expand into groceries, shoes, smart homes, streaming, and entertainment. Where it doesn't buy, it imitates. Sellers on its marketplace must reveal their sales data. Amazon studies which products succeed, launches its own versions under the Amazon label, and then gives those versions better placement and pricing. To customers, this feels like convenience and low prices. To smaller businesses, it feels eerily similar to the Cleveland massacre in slow motion. Standard Oil controlled the flow of physical energy. Today's tech giants control the flow of information and attention, but structurally, they aren't doing anything radically new. Alphabet, Google's parent company, is essentially a modern trust. At the top sits a holding entity. Under it are Google Search, YouTube, Waymo, DeepMind, and a host of other subsidiaries that appear separate but serve a unified strategic purpose. Google commands around 90% of the global search market. That level of dominance actually exceeds Standard Oil's refining share at its peak. Yet regulators hesitate to label it a monopoly in the old sense because users aren't paying cash directly for each search. The cost is more abstract: data, profiling, targeted advertising, and an information environment where one company quietly shapes what most people see first. Meta operates in a similar way. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and other products are presented as different platforms meeting different needs. Behind the scenes, they are pipelines into a single advertising and data extraction system. Users feel like they are choosing between multiple social networks, when in reality, they are mostly choosing between services under one corporate umbrella. Rockefeller's trust used legal structures to hide unified control behind multiple corporate names. Today's information empires hide unified control behind multiple app icons. The logic of consolidation and dominance has simply adapted to the digital age. Rockefeller understood early that true power doesn't just come from winning under the rules, it comes from influencing the rules themselves. Standard Oil benefited from railroad regulations and safety standards that it could easily meet due to its scale and technology, while smaller rivals struggled or died. Regulation, when written in the right way, became a moat around his empire. This is what we now call regulatory capture, the industry shaping the framework that is supposedly policing it. That logic is everywhere today. Pharmaceutical companies fund large portions of medical research, contribute heavily to regulators' budgets through user fees, and lobby intensely on patent law, drug approval pathways, and generic competition. Banks do likewise with financial regulation. Tech firms lobby on privacy, antitrust definitions, and content moderation rules. The result is often a system where the largest players find compliance burdens manageable and sometimes even beneficial, while smaller entrants are choked by complexity and cost. Rockefeller's other major innovation was philanthropy as a strategic instrument. The Rockefeller Foundation, created in 1913, poured money into universities, medical schools, and public health initiatives. This undoubtedly did real good, but it also steered the development of medicine and education towards certain models, especially pharmaceutical and chemical approaches to treatment. Modern megadonors have followed this script. Large foundations shaped by billionaires fund global health, education, climate policy, and technology governance. They are praised for their generosity while also gaining influence over what is researched, what is prioritized, and which solutions are considered legitimate. It is power, softened by the language of charity. All of this can sound abstract until you trace it through your own day. When you fill your car or pay for transportation, you are almost certainly interacting with oil companies that are direct descendants of Standard Oil or competitors forced to adopt its methods to survive. ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, and a handful of others. You buy products online and run into Amazon's ecosystem, whether directly or via retailers, who rely on its logistics and cloud services. You search for information, and in most cases, Google determines which answers you see first and which are buried. You stay in touch with friends and family on platforms owned by Meta, which aggregates your behavior into a profile sold to advertisers. When you get sick, you enter a healthcare system whose training, standards, and treatment patterns have been heavily influenced by philanthropic and industrial agendas that date back to Rockefeller's era. You pay insurance premiums to large financial institutions built on the same holding company structures that Standard Oil pioneered. You pay taxes into a regulatory system that has been thoroughly lobbied by the industries it oversees. Individually, each choice feels normal. A tank of gas here, an Amazon order there, a Google search, a doctor's visit. Cumulatively, it is a constant stream of money and data flowing into a relatively small group of massive corporations. They use Rockefeller's logic to squeeze cost and risk out of their own operations and shift it onto consumers, workers, and smaller competitors. You do receive real value, cheaper goods, faster delivery, more information, powerful medicine, but the price includes living inside a system you neither designed nor control. Rockefeller saw competition as wasteful, even sinful, and built a system that rewarded consolidation. The uncomfortable part is that, at a technical level, his logic often works. Standard Oil dramatically cut the price of kerosene, making clean light affordable to ordinary families. Today's giants also deliver clear benefits. Amazon makes global retail accessible from your couch. Google answers questions that once required a library. Pharmaceutical firms cure illnesses that would have been death sentences a century ago. Efficiency, scale, and integration genuinely improve everyday life in many ways. But that same system channels an ever-growing share of wealth and influence to the top. When a handful of firms dominate energy, food distribution, finance, healthcare, and information, they aren't just serving customers. They are shaping the boundaries of what is possible in the economy and ultimately in public policy. Alternatives struggle to appear, and when they do, they are often acquired, copied, or regulated into irrelevance. You cannot simply walk away from this structure. You can choose to understand it and react intelligently. That might mean deliberately supporting smaller businesses where you can, even at higher cost. It might mean backing serious antitrust efforts rather than cosmetic reforms. Or it might mean accepting that the system is here for the foreseeable future and choosing to invest in the companies that benefit from it. So you are at least partially on the receiving end of its concentration, rather than only on the paying end. None of these options are perfect, but pretending the system is accidental or temporary is not one of them. If this story changed the way you see Rockefeller, not as a dusty historical figure, but as the engineer of the very corporate machine you live inside, then you've taken the first step that most people never do. You've seen that Standard Oil wasn't just an oil company, it was a prototype. The methods it used have been coded into the DNA of modern capitalism. Own the supply chain, eliminate rivals, shape the rules, and launder power through philanthropy. You can't opt out of this system in any pure way. You will still buy from companies that use his playbook. You will still rely on platforms that trace their structures back to his trust model. But once you see the pattern, you stop confusing it with the natural way things work. You start recognizing it as a human-built framework, designed to be efficient for those at the top and merely convenient for everyone else. If you want to keep unpacking how this machine actually operates, who built it, who maintains it, and how it quietly directs money, influence, and information, then subscribe and stay with this series. We're not here to tell fairy tales about bad corporations or good markets. We're here to map the architecture of power you live in every day. Because once you can see Rockefeller's system clearly, you can stop being just another cog and start deciding how you're going to live inside it.